Hi, everyone, and welcome to Torches Coach Connect. Each month, we are going to be highlighting one of our very own coaches to introduce them to the community and to glean some of their wisdom to share with you all. And this month, we are very excited to introduce you to Stephanie Staidle, one of our coaches, and actually someone who I have known for many years back when you lived in Berkeley. So, welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Very happy to have you. So, one of the things that I shared with you, in our nomination of you and highlighting you is the way in which you embody the torch value of be courageous and lean into the madness in your boldness and how you challenge yourself and others. So, the first question I wanted to pose to you is what does that torch value mean to you to be courageous and lean into the madness? What does that look like in action?
Well, I think whenever we're talking about personal and professional growth, it's the fear that we want to lean into. It's that madness, and that takes a lot of courage to stretch ourselves and to be vulnerable, to take a deep look at ourselves. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of being courageous and leaning into that madness, the madness maybe of your mind or the madness of whatever's going on in the company. Like, I think of like whatever the challenge is, to actually lean into it, to not avoid it, to move through it, and to use it as a growth opportunity.
Thank you for sharing that. I actually have a little bit of a follow-up question because I was working with some of my own fear last night, right? As a professional and as a person and just getting curious to, I feel like a lot of us, in the workplace and in life think about when we feel that fear, we want to fix it immediately. And so how can we be with the fear, right, and still be courageous without, sometimes it doesn't go away immediately, right? Sometimes it kind of lingers. So do you have any recommendations that you provide for your clients around that?
Yeah, well, the
Yeah.
first thing I always tell my clients is that courage is not the absence of fear. It's having fear and acting anyway. Now, sometimes we're in situations where if the fear is too paralyzing, then we need to bring the fear down, where you might still be nervous, but it's in the action of moving past it that you start to rewire your brain, and you won't have the same amount of fear in future scenarios. But really, just a quick mindfulness exercise that I really love to use for myself and for my clients is to actually help them find where the fear lives in their body. We are very smart human beings, but we're spending a lot of time up here and we're disconnected from our body. And the emotions that we feel, they start in our body first, and then our mind makes up an interpretation about that. So the mind is actually the second to know. So I'll have them scan their body and look for where there might be tension, where that fear is in their body, and to really just pay attention to what does it look like? Does it have a temperature? Is it a certain color? Observing it from kind of the outside. And for just a couple of minutes, I'll ask them to just put their awareness on that sensation, to not judge it, to not try to interpret it, just to be with that feeling. And although it might seem miraculous, it really isn't. It's just the body is trying to get your attention, and it actually just needs you to pay attention to it. And when we do that, it starts to wane. And so that is one of my favorite exercises because it's very simple. Anyone can do that. And I'll have my clients put themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of that intensity. And in my experience, the majority of the time, they'll notice that that intensity will go down, 3, maybe even 4 notches. And then when you can get to that more grounded place, then you can start to look at ways you can take action because you're no longer paralyzed by that feeling.
Mhm. Thank you so much. That's such a helpful tip. So helpful. I want to shift gears with the second question and getting curious about your story and what motivated you to be a coach.
Well, what motivated me to be a coach was I got coached.
Mm.
So I actually, my background's in psychology. I started off as a therapist. I got my master's in art therapy. I was working in social work, and therapy is amazing, and I think it really does have its place. But I also think there's pieces that are missing when it comes to human development, and I started to do personal development courses where I was coached mostly in neurolinguistic programming, which Tony Robbins is kind of known for, this way of reframing and looking at things differently and more action oriented techniques. And it made such a difference for me. It really filled in a lot of gaps that therapy was missing. And because it had such a profound effect on my life, I decided I wanted to become a coach. And I took a different route. A lot of people go and they get a certification in coaching, but because I already had my therapy background, I was able to really learn the coaching by learning on the ground. So I volunteered to coach some of these programs and also be coached in those methodologies and learn that way. So I learned through experience. And then just being able to see the results that my clients were getting, I mean, that continues to motivate you to do it. There's no greater joy than to see your client transform and get what they came to get. So that was it's really meaningful work.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Is in thinking about sort of the difference between therapy and coaching, right? I think that folks sort of like come back to these and try to interchange them, but they really are two different methodologies, right? And so when you're working with folks and they're questioning like, do I need therapy? Do I need coaching? Like, how do you sort of define and distinguish between the two in terms of what someone needs?
Yeah, that's such a good question. The interesting thing about therapy is it's continuing to evolve, and there's new modalities in therapy that I find are very closely related to coaching, such as neurolinguistic programming, cognitive behavioral therapy, and also positive psychology. You see a lot of that. There is an overlap. But for me, I find that when someone has something very deep that they need to heal, and it might not be easy to heal that in just with coaching. They really need the safe space to explore maybe past traumas. Or if, going back to that kind of being paralyzed, if something is really keeping them stuck and getting in the way, for example, anxiety or depression, that's something that you want to have a trained therapist work with you on. I have that background, but most coaches don't. And that's something best left to those professionals.
Hmm. Hmm. And then in terms of coaching, like,
Oh, yeah. So for me, the way I look at it is therapy is really good at, looking at the past. Coaching for me is looking into the future. So it's very future oriented. It's like, what is it that you want and how are you going to get there? And you're going to start taking actions now to get to that goal. And of course, one of the coach's responsibilities is to help you move through any barriers or challenges, especially mindset blocks that come up along the way. But for me, coaching is very action oriented. You're not just sitting in a room and exploring things and analyzing, which again can be very helpful, but it's really about taking those things and putting them into your life in real time.
yeah, yeah. I mean, as someone who's been coached, I can attest to that. And just I've been in therapy and I've been coached, and there's something very valuable about working with a coach, someone who's very invested in your growth, very much like strategizing alongside of you, being able to reflect back, right? More direct. I feel like my experience with coaches a lot more direct and really moving you forward in a much more tangible way than I've experienced in therapy before.
Yeah, coaches keep you accountable.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't like that because we're holding you accountable to what you said you wanted, even
Right.
on the days when you don't want to do the things or it's uncomfortable. So we provide that container for you to start to stretch. And I personally believe that it is a coach's job to be straight with our clients as to what we see, because it doesn't serve our clients for them to continue behavior patterns that aren't helping them. So sometimes, the people around us, they love us so much that they won't tell us the truth, and that might be getting in the way of our growth and our development. And so coaches have a great way of being able to reflect back what they see, of course in a loving way, but in a way that like allows you to really, be with the things that you need to work on.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. So in working with all of your clients and developing leaders, what is there something that you have noticed that differentiates a good leader from a great leader? Is there
Communication,
quality? Okay.
hands down. That is actually the biggest barrier that I see,
Hmm.
and that I really wish all human beings were more trained in. We don't get that training.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how to listen. We're
Yep.
usually listening to this voice in here, not the other person, and that gets in the way. And then we also misinterpret maybe what someone's saying. We have our own stories, and that can also get in the way of creating connection. Being able to resolve conflict. A lot of us grow up being afraid of conflict as though it's a bad thing, but really it's very healthy. We just haven't been taught how to be with it in healthy ways. A lot of us have had unhealthy relationships with conflict, unfortunately. So that all ties into, for me, all ties into communication. And communication isn't just the verbal stuff either. It's who are you showing up with? What's the nonverbal communication? Your way of being. That you know when you enter a room, it's not just about confidence, but are you an empathetic leader? Are you looking to make sure everyone has a voice and is heard in those meetings? Are you showing up with grace and vulnerability?
Mm-hmm.
So that for me is what really distinguishes a good leader from a great one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I've had experienced many leaders who are not great communicators, right? And that is, how can you really be a great leader in that sense, right? Because leaders are very much, you look to the followers, right? To the people who are reporting up or the people who are working alongside. And if you don't have that level of baseline healthy communication, vulnerability, authenticity, consideration, empathy, all of the things, and how can you really build a great team, a great organization? So I'm really glad. I'm really glad that you shared that. And for our last question, I wanted to know, what advice do you have for leaders right now? I know that we're in a pandemic. We are, amidst looking at our racism and social unrest here in the U.S. California, in particularly, is on fire. We have economic uncertainty and upheaval. So I know that there's a lot happening right now. And what advice would you have for leaders now?
Oh, so much. But if I were to narrow it down to a couple of things, I would say, first of all, have grace with yourself. We're all going collectively, we're going through a lot. And I even catch myself doing this, having an expectation that I'm supposed to be performing at the same level that I would if, a pandemic wasn't happening, if, systemic racism wasn't like if all these things weren't happening, and that's an unrealistic expectation. So we need to give ourselves a lot more grace, a lot more space. Also, if you're a manager or you're a founder, to give your employees that space too, and self-care and taking breaks and not expecting to be perfect. There's a lot of employees that are still, they have to homeschool their kids, and they're so hard on themselves for not being the perfect parent. And it's like, these are unprecedented times. Like, we have to be a lot kinder to ourselves, and be forgiving for ourselves and others. And then the second thing I would say is to, lean into the madness, similar to the value. Go do the hard things. Be willing to be wrong. Be willing to reevaluate your beliefs as to what you think how the way the world works, or how the judgments you have about others. I've the past few years been diving deeper into my own anti-racism work, and I thought I was super woke. Clearly I was not, and I'm always learning, and it's not easy stuff. It's uncomfortable. We have to, as a white person, I have to deal with shame and guilt that arises. But that's part of the work, and that's all that I can do. It's important that I do that so that I can be a part of the change. And so, leaning into that madness, leaning into the vulnerable, hard work, knowing that the benefit outweighs the cost. That's the second thing I would say is important right now.
So beautifully said. Thank you so much, Stephanie. It has been so lovely to spend some time with you and to just hear you share your wisdom.
Oh, thank
Thank
you for
you.
having me.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Bye.